All right, so we've got some fascinating stuff to dig into today. Seems like there's a lot of buzz swirling around Red Bull Racing right now.
Yeah, some really interesting stuff.
Yeah. Specifically, we've got this transcript from a video on the F1 Blog's YouTube channel, and the title, well, I won't try to pronounce it, but it basically translates to something like Emergency Summit at Red Bull.
That's right.
And it looks like they're diving deep into some potential shakeups, possible driver changes, performance concerns, and maybe even a little bit of team politics.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive, if you will, is to really try to understand what's going on at Red Bull. What are these issues they're facing? Is a driver swap really on the table? And what's the real story behind all this talk of an emergency summit?
Right. And of course, we want to look at all this with a critical eye. We'll be mindful of any political angles or biases,
Right.
but we're not here to take sides. We just want to understand the information that's being presented. So one of the most intriguing parts of this whole thing is this emergency summit supposedly happening at Red Bull's factory in Milton Keynes. And get this, Max Verstappen himself is rumored to be attending.
That's unusual, isn't it?
It is. The word on the street is that they're trying to figure out how to fix some issues with their RB21 car. And all this is happening while there's a ton of speculation about Liam Lawson's future with the team. Plus, we've got former F1 driver Ralf Schumacher weighing in with some pretty strong opinions. Having Verstappen involved at this point in the season, I mean, it's got to be a big deal, right?
Oh, absolutely. That's not something you see every day. The video highlights a report suggesting Red Bull might actually make a decision about Lawson's seat before the Japanese Grand Prix. Yeah, and the report suggests they could replace him with YUKI Tsunoda. Talk about pressure. I mean, can you imagine?
Yeah.
This potential swap has already stirred up some, well, let's just say tension between the two drivers. Tsunoda's come out saying he's 100% ready to take the spot, and Lawson fired back, reminding everyone that he's actually beaten Tsunoda in the lower racing categories. So, classic driver rivalry stuff. It's a high-stakes game, and both of them want to prove they belong in that top seat. What's your take on this potential swap, at first glance?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the rumors about Tsunoda possibly moving up to the main Red Bull team have been around for a while. But the fact that they might make a decision this early in the season, it just makes you wonder if there's something more going on behind the scenes. And then you throw Ralf Schumacher's opinion into the mix, and things get even more interesting.
Oh, yeah. Schumacher definitely didn't hold back. He basically said that if Lawson gets demoted or loses his seat altogether and Tsunoda is offered the Red Bull spot, Tsunoda should actually decline the offer. Yeah, his reasoning? He thinks that driving alongside Verstappen, in the current car at least, is basically a career killer. He says anyone they put in that second seat will get sent home after a few races. Ouch. He believes Red Bull should focus on building a car that's more competitive for both drivers, not just Verstappen. Otherwise, he argues, Verstappen will just burn Tsunoda. He says Tsunoda would have no chance. Pretty harsh assessment of the team dynamics.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah.
It does kind of make you think back to how other drivers have fared as Verstappen's teammate. It hasn't always been pretty.
Right.
And the commentator in the F1 Blogs video seems to agree with Schumacher to some extent. They call the second Red Bull seat a trap, suggesting that it's more about being Verstappen's wingman than having a real shot at winning.
Exactly. And they point out that Red Bull hasn't exactly been rushing to promote Tsunoda to the main team. It seems like maybe they're only considering him now because they've sort of run out of other options. But here's another layer to this whole Tsunoda situation, which the F1 Blogs commentator really digs into. They suggest that Tsunoda's current spot at AlphaTauri, or Racing Bulls, might actually be linked to his nationality and Honda's involvement with the team.
Right.
With Honda pulling out of F1 after 2026, Tsunoda's future at AlphaTauri could be uncertain. So he's in a tough spot. Does he take the Red Bull seat, knowing he'll likely be in Verstappen's shadow and potentially damage his reputation? Or does he say no, risking being seen as, I don't know, maybe lacking ambition or even courage, which could hurt his chances with other teams down the line? It's a real catch-22.
A true dilemma. So we've got Lawson potentially on the way out, Tsunoda facing a difficult choice, and then there's this other name that's come up, Franco COLAPINTO. What's the latest on him?
Well, F1 Blogs mentioned that there were rumors about Red Bull being interested in Colapinto last year, but they say they haven't heard anything concrete recently. In fact, they suggest that Colapinto might actually be better off staying with Alpine.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah. The way they see it, Alpine's a factory team, which means they have more control over their car development and their long-term strategy. Plus, they'll have Mercedes engines starting in 2026, which could be a big advantage. So compared to potentially getting stuck in Red Bull's junior team, or Racing Bulls, Alpine might offer a clearer path to a top seat for a young driver like Colapinto.
Makes sense. So it seems like the driver market around Red Bull is pretty chaotic right now. Lots of moving pieces, lots of uncertainty. Let's shift gears a bit now and talk about this emergency summit. Helmut Marko has said publicly that the meeting is about closing the performance gap to their rivals. But what's really striking is that Verstappen is going to be there.
I know, right? It's not every day that a star driver like Verstappen gets involved in these kinds of technical meetings. The commentator even calls it surprising and strange, which suggests that even within the F1 world, this is seen as out of the ordinary. It definitely highlights how seriously Red Bull is taking these performance issues. And let's not forget, Verstappen's partner, Kelly Piquet, is expecting a baby soon. So for him to prioritize this meeting at this time, well, it speaks volumes about the urgency of the situation.
Right. It's not like he doesn't have other things on his mind. So what's the thinking behind Verstappen's involvement?
Well, the commentator points out that Red Bull has a history of prioritizing Verstappen's feedback when developing their cars. It's led to some incredibly fast machines, but also to cars that can be quite difficult for other drivers to handle. And this brings up a really important question. Is Verstappen actively sharing his knowledge and insights with Lawson? Or is the car development entirely focused on what works best for Verstappen? You know, it makes you think about the dynamics within the team. How much are they really working together?
That's a good point. And to make things even more interesting, the F1 Blogs video includes some radio transcripts from Liam Lawson during the Chinese Grand Prix. These messages give us a real window into the challenges he was facing behind the wheel.
They do. Over and over again, he complains about a lack of grip and difficulty rotating the car. He says things like, I have no grip to fight, I have no balance, absolutely nothing, and I can barely rotate the car. Ouch. And at the end of the race, he reports that the car felt good for one lap, and then the front end just gave way. His last message is pretty telling. He says, received. Sorry, mate, I really tried everything to compensate. You can hear the frustration in his voice.
It's tough to listen to. And the commentator interprets these messages as signs of understeer, which means the car isn't turning as sharply as it should. It forces the driver to take a wider line through corners, which slows them down and makes it harder to get the power down. But here's the thing. Red Bull cars are usually known for being really pointy, meaning they turn in very quickly and aggressively. We've heard Alex Albon talk about it, and it seems to be what Verstappen prefers as well. So why is Lawson struggling so much with understeer? Are they giving him a different setup? Is he having trouble managing the front tires? It's puzzling.
Yeah, it is strange. It seems like there's a mismatch somewhere. Either the car isn't set up properly for Lawson, or he's not driving it in a way that works with its natural characteristics. And you have to factor in the track conditions in China. That circuit is notoriously hard on the front left tire.
Right.
So maybe Lawson was just struggling more than usual with tire degradation, which would explain the understeer.
Okay, so that's the bad news. But the F1 Blogs video also points out that Red Bull did have some positive moments in China.
That's right. While they struggled on the medium tires early in the race, they seemed much more competitive on the hard tires, especially towards the end when the fuel load was lighter.
So what does that tell us?
Well, the commentator suggests that the Red Bull car is incredibly sensitive to tire management and how much fuel it's carrying. In China, the front left tire was taking a real beating in the first stint on those mediums. But when they switched to the hards and the fuel load decreased, the car's performance improved significantly. It indicates that the car has a very narrow operating window. It only works optimally under very specific conditions.
Interesting. So taking all this into account, Lawson struggles, the potential driver swap, the emergency summit, the car's performance characteristics, what was the F1 Blogs commentator's final verdict?
Well, they don't think replacing Lawson is the answer. Their take is that Red Bull needs to be patient and work with him. They need to help him understand the car better and maybe even adjust the car's development direction to make it less extreme and easier to drive. They even suggest that Red Bull could learn something from Mercedes, who have supposedly built a more benign car this year.
A more forgiving car, basically.
Exactly. The commentator's point is that Red Bull's current car is so finely tuned to Verstappen's preferences that it's incredibly difficult for anyone else to get the most out of it. So whether they stick with Lawson or bring in Tsunoda, the key might be making the car a little less Verstappen-centric and a little more driver-friendly overall.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Red Bull situation, what are some of the key takeaways for our listeners?
I think this story really highlights the immense pressure and scrutiny that exists at the highest level of motorsport.
It sure does.
One bad race, one driver struggling to adapt, and the rumor mill goes into overdrive. It's a constant battle to prove yourself, to stay ahead of the curve. And for someone like Tsunoda facing this potential decision about the Red Bull seat, it's a fascinating dilemma. Do you grab a chance to race for a top team, even if it means being overshadowed by a dominant teammate? Or do you choose a path that offers more stability and a better chance to develop your skills, even if it's with a less prestigious team? It's a tough call.
For sure. And the car itself is a huge part of the equation. It's a reminder that even the best teams in F1 can stumble when it comes to finding the right balance in car development. Building a car that's perfectly suited to one driver's style might actually hinder the performance of others. It makes you wonder, should teams prioritize maximizing the performance of their star driver? Or should they strive for a car that's more adaptable and easier for a wider range of drivers to handle? There's no easy answer.
I think the beauty of F1 is that it's more than just cars going around a track. It's about the people, the rivalries, the constant pursuit of perfection. This deep dive into F1 blogs' analysis has given us a glimpse behind the curtain. We've seen the driver dynamics, the technical challenges, the strategic decisions that shape the sport. It's a reminder that even in a world dominated by technology and data, it's the human element that truly drives the competition.
Absolutely. So as we leave our listeners with this Red Bull saga unfolding, what's a question they can ponder in their own lives?
Well, I think it's worth asking yourself.
Hmm.
How do you balance the pursuit of immediate success with the need for long-term growth and development? Do you go all in for a risky but potentially rewarding opportunity, or do you prioritize stability and a slower but perhaps more sustainable path? It's a question that applies not just to F1 drivers, but to all of us as we navigate our own careers and ambitions.
Very well said. Now, before we go, a quick message from our friends at F1 Blogs. Welcome to the channel. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the Red Bull situation. For more in-depth analysis, driver interviews, and all the latest F1 news, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss their next video.
Until next time, keep those engines revving.